You've worn the uniform of a united nation, fought tyranny, and raised the flag of freedom in foreign lands. You've been a soldier in a war where your side had the official goal to defend life, liberty, independence, and religious freedom, and to preserve human rights and justice in their own lands as well as in other lands. But when you return home, the restaurant door closes in your face, the ballot box remains locked, and the policeman reaches for his club. You are an American World War II veteran of color, and for you, the war for freedom, equal rights, and dignity is far from over. Welcome to Season 1 of TimeGhost Cold War coverage in our series War to War, where we cover the events of the decade after World War II that brought man from the brink of destruction to the threshold of the stars. I'm Spartacus Olson. Okay, so while Black American soldiers faced segregation, racism, and inequality in the U.S. Armed Forces during World War II, they also gained respect as equals in battle, enjoyed the international camaraderie of the Allied forces, and spent time in nations where they were more equal than at home. In contrast to the white soldier who lost rights as a combatant, the black soldier enjoyed more equality and freedom than as a free civilian. Then, as they return home, they again face the harsh reality of inequality and oppression. When they try to be treated as equals, they face continued segregation, racist oppression, and violence under Jim Crow policies that on the state level have long annulled much of the constitutional emancipation enacted after the Civil War almost a century earlier. Although the terror against Black lives through murder by lynching has lessened decade by decade from an annual average of close to 100 some 50 years earlier to a handful per year in the 1940s, the threat of racist violence and the material, legal, and social disadvantages facing people of color in America are significant, especially in the southern states. Nationally, colored students complete on average 6.6 years of schooling, while the average white student spends 8.4 years in school. In segregated schools, one should add. Black employees earn half as much for the same job as white workers. In Birmingham, war heroes have to use the same detours through crooked streets to dodge harassing police with their dogs as when they were boys. In Batesburg, South Carolina, decorated U.S. Army Sergeant Isaac Woodard Jr. is pulled off a Greyhound bus after a dispute during the trip and turned over to the local police, who proceed to beat him blind. In Georgia, Army veteran Maceo Snipes is shot by white men at his home for being the first black man to vote in his county. The war promised change, but change doesn't come by promise alone. And so they begin to fight again, this time at home. Black veterans now join local chapters of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, en masse, write to newspapers, organize pickets. The world is watching, they say, and so are we. The contradiction of democracy becomes unbearable. A nation that sent its sons to liberate Europe and Asia only to return to racist oppression and violence, even murder. In 1946, news of the fate of Sergeant Woodard spreads like wildfire. Across the country, black newspapers run his story beside headlines from the Nuremberg trials. The message is clear. Justice should begin at home. The NAACP, under the sharp and steady hand of Thurgood Marshall, sharpens its legal strategy. No more petitions, no more apologies. Now the movement steps into courtrooms like battlefields. In Morgan v. Virginia in 1946, the Supreme Court rules that segregation on interstate buses is unconstitutional. But the ruling rings hollow without enforcement. Southern states ignore it. White sheriffs shrug. Racism, after all, is still the law in practice. Then, in April 1947, comes the Journey of Reconciliation, a trial run for what later becomes the Freedom Rides. 16 men, 8 black and 8 white, board Greyhound buses and ride through the Upper South to test the Morgan decision. They sit where they please, they ride shoulder to shoulder, and they are arrested in North Carolina and Virginia. Among them is Bayard Rustin, quiet and unshakable, who spends weeks on a chain gang for sitting in the wrong seat beside a white man. When I go to jail, he later says, it is not a sacrifice, it is a duty. Meanwhile, the military itself begins to shift. President Harry S. Truman, a Missouri Democrat with no civil rights pedigree, watches the rising tensions with unease. Urban protests, Soviet propaganda pointing fingers at American hypocrisy, and rightful claims that America preaches liberal democracy to the world but lives despicable levels of injustice and inequality at home. To the White House, it is becoming clear that in this new Cold War era, the U.S. cannot claim moral leadership while black veterans are beaten and gunned down in their uniforms. Thus, Truman acts. On July 26, 1948, he signs Executive Order 9981, declaring an end to racial segregation in the U.S. Armed Forces. There shall be equality of treatment and opportunity, it reads, without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. It is more than a document. It is a breach in the wall. The military, that most conservative of institutions, begins to integrate. Change comes slowly, but it comes. Black and white soldiers sleep in the same barracks, eat at the same mess, march side by side. But in the South, the backlash stiffens. Poll taxes still block the ballot. Lynching still claim lives. The Dixiecrats, Southern Democrats, furious over Truman's civil rights program, split from the party and nominate one of their own, Strom Thurmond, for president in the 1948 elections. At a campaign rally, Thurmond thunders, "All the laws of Washington and all the bayonets of the army cannot force the Negro into our homes, our schools, and our churches." He carries 4 southern states, but Truman still wins the presidency by a secure margin. Preserving segregation is not an election-winning issue, at least not in the populous northern and western states. In the urban north, a new class of black professionals, teachers, lawyers, journalists begin to assert themselves. In Harlem, Detroit, and Chicago, civic groups swell. In churches, basements, and union halls, strategy sessions unfold. Black newspapers like the Chicago Defender and Pittsburgh Courier beam stories of defiance into homes across the country. The movement is no longer just rural, it is now national. Murderous violence that was previously largely ignored by most of the media now makes national headlines. Like when Harry T. Moore, an NAACP field secretary in Florida, and his wife are killed in the bombing of their home on Christmas night in 1951. Earlier that same year, racist hatred faces a peaceful challenge in the schoolyards of Virginia. Barbara Jones, a 16-year-old high school student in Prince Edward County, organizes a walkout to protest the squalid conditions of her segregated school. She gathers her classmates, locks the principal out of the building, and phones the NAACP and demands equal schools now. Thurgood Marshall takes up her case. And so begins the legal assault on school segregation, a campaign that will take years, cost livelihoods, and change the country. The pivotal case is Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka. When the U.S. Supreme Court takes on the case, the NAACP's legal team walks into the Marble Hall armed and ready with evidence, photographs, affidavits, and one simple argument. Separate is inherently unequal. Thurgood Marshall, tall and calm, speaks with the force of law and the tremble of truth. He shows the damage of segregation, not only in resources, but in the hearts and minds of black children who learn day after day that they are second class. On May 17, 1954, the decision comes. Chief Justice Earl Warren reads the words aloud. In the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. The decision is unanimous. The news cracks across America like lightning. In Harlem, people cheer in the streets. In Kansas City, pastors ring church bells. The Chicago Defender prints the headline in bold, "Segregation ruled illegal." But in Jackson, Mississippi, windows slam shut. In Little Rock, men mutter in barbershops. And in the Carolina countryside, the Ku Klux Klan meets in hushed gatherings and fans its embers. The ruling does not provide a plan, no timeline, no specific remedies. It simply ends the lie. In court, the line between justice and reality is paper thin. On the ground, it is made of guns, threats, and broken glass. Southern lawmakers react with fury. Within weeks, Senator Harry F. Byrd of Virginia calls for a campaign of massive resistance. School boards across the South pass emergency measures to block integration. Parents form all-white citizen councils, nonviolent white supremacist organizations, and whisper about closing public schools entirely. Georgia Governor Herman Talmadge declares, "We will maintain separate schools come hell or high water." And hell is what they bring. In the wake of Brown, the fight spreads beyond the courtrooms. It moves into school districts, churches, grocery stores, bus stops. There it is fought not only with briefs and judges, but with courage and community. White Southern elites organize to resist not with hoods, but with bank accounts and school boards. They intimidate black families who dare to register their children in white schools. Jobs are lost. Mortgages are revoked. Families are driven out of towns. In Clarendon County, South Carolina, where the Briggs v. Elliott case had first challenged school inequality, black families face economic ruin. But still, they try. Then comes another pivotal case of murderous violence. In Chicago, a 14-year-old boy named Emmett Till boards a train to visit relatives in the small town of Money, Mississippi. He is bold, talkative, a product of the North. In Money, he talks to a white woman, Mrs. Bryant, behind the counter of a grocery store. Allegedly, he flirts with her, even touches her and cat whistles. Decades later, this account will become heavily contested. Several days later, Bryant's husband, Roy, and his half-brother, J.W. Millen, abduct Emmett from his relative's home. 3 days later, his body is found in the Tallahatchie River, mutilated, beaten, shot. When brought to court, his killers are acquitted by an all-white jury in only an hour. But when Emmett's corpse is returned to Chicago for burial, his mother does something that will have ripple effects across the globe. Despite his mutilated state, Mammy Till Mobley opens his casket. The funeral draws thousands, and the world sees the photograph of his face, unrecognizable, bloated, broken. "I wanted the world to see what they did to my boy," she says, and it does. In black newspapers, the tone hardens. "No more waiting," reads one editorial. "The law has spoken, but the South refuses to listen." Meanwhile, a new generation emerges. College students gather in dorm rooms and libraries to study nonviolence. Veterans write letters to Congress. Ministers organize civic leagues. And behind them all, black churches are now the engine driving a force for change. Choirs rehearse not only hymns, but protest songs. Pastors preach liberation. Collection plates are passed around not to finance the church, but for legal defense funds. Then, on December 1st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, a seamstress boards a city bus and sits down in the black section. Her name is Rosa Parks. When the bus fills up, a standing white man demands that Parks give up her seat to him. She refuses and does not move. The bus driver threatens her. She does not move. Police are called. She does not move. So she's arrested, fingerprinted, and fined. She will later say that as she resists, she is thinking of Emmett Till. This is not the first incident of people of color resisting bus segregation and white privilege in Montgomery. It's not even the first time that Rosa Parks tries to refuse to move. But this time, it is a spark that ignites a fire. Word spreads across Montgomery's black community. Leaflets are printed. Phone trees hum with activity. Churches call emergency meetings. A young pastor, just 26 years old, takes the microphone at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. His name is Martin Luther King Jr., and his voice is calm but firm. "We are not wrong. If we are wrong, the Constitution is wrong. If we are wrong, God Almighty is wrong." And the people listen. On December 5th, 1955, the Montgomery bus boycott begins. Black residents stop riding city buses. They walk to work, they carpool, they ride mules, bicycles, and wagons. Elderly women in church hats walk 5 miles to clean homes. Teenagers run through the rain to school. Ministers offer rides while mechanics work night and day to keep old cars running. City officials retaliate. King's house is bombed. Churches are attacked. Boycott leaders are arrested under antiquated laws. Insurance companies cancel policies on carpool vehicles. But the movement holds. Every hardship becomes a badge. Every mile walked becomes a sermon in motion. It holds not just for a few days, not a few weeks, but over a year at 381 days. And in the background, more lawsuits rise. Browder v. Gale works its way through the courts. In June 1956, a federal court rules that bus segregation is unconstitutional. The decision is upheld by the Supreme Court. The city of Montgomery, humiliated and cornered, begins to dismantle its bus laws. On December 20th, 1956, the boycott ends and King boards a city bus and sits quietly in the front seat. Montgomery's streets return to their usual bustle, but nothing is the same. After 180 years, black passengers sit where they choose now, but the gaze of white drivers lingers. The seats may be equal, but the city is divided more than ever. Bombings increase, homes are burned, phone calls hiss with threats, but still, they ride. Other cities watch, and the boycott and its aftermath become a blueprint. Across the South, whispers begin to swell. If they can do it, why not us? In January 1957, just weeks after the boycott ends, leaders gather in Atlanta and then in Montgomery to create something permanent. Out of their meetings, a new force is born, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC. Its mission is simple: nonviolent protest, moral clarity, mass mobilization. Its president is Martin Luther King Jr. The SCLC does not seek to replace the NAACP. It seeks to empower the people in the pews and the fields. They preach from pulpits and meet in church basements. They print pamphlets, organize prayer marches, and train citizens in the tactics of nonviolence. Their weapon is dignity. Their target is the entire architecture of Jim Crow. But the white resistance continues to harden. In Little Rock, Arkansas, the battle shifts to the classroom again. In September 1957, supported by the NAACP, 9 black students, young, bright, and determined, prepare to integrate to Central High School. The courts have ruled. The law is clear, but Governor Orville Faubus has no intention of obeying. He calls in the Arkansas National Guard to surround the school and block the students' entry. He claims it is for their safety. And indeed, a mob has gathered to stop the students from entering. Although it will later come out that this mob was likely organized by the governor's office to deliberately inflame the situation. On September 4th, the 9 students arrive at the school on top of the National Guard and the mob. The nascent television networks, as well as local and national newspapers, have sent out reporters, photographers, and cameramen. They capture how the students, especially 15-year-old Elizabeth Eckford, walk through the screaming mob, only to finally be blocked from going to school by the troopers. She will remember. I tried to see a friendly face somewhere in the mob. I looked into the face of an old woman, and it seemed a kind face. But when I looked at her again, she spat on me. When the images of the poised, peaceful teenagers confronted with visceral hatred and the brutal force of arms are broadcast across America, many in the nation watch with indignation and embarrassment. Weeks of political back and forth follow, but finally, on September 24th, President Eisenhower sends in federal troops from the 101st Airborne Division to escort the children, now famous as the Little Rock Nine, to school. With the dignity and calm they displayed on the first day already, they will suffer harassment and hatred from their fellow students and their fellow students' parents for a year. But the message of defiance in the name of inclusion they have sent will continue to echo in media and political discourse. Part of that message is that while the South will not yield without force, the federal government, however cautiously, will increase the pressure on behalf of people of color. Elsewhere, the NAACP continues its legal grind. Court by court, it chips away at housing covenants, voting restrictions, and segregation statutes. Thurgood Marshall becomes a legal legend, though his victories are slow and partial. Many southern towns close public schools entirely rather than integrate. In Prince Edward County, Virginia, schools are shuttered for 5 years. Education is sacrificed to maintain apartheid. Nonetheless, the movement presses on. King becomes a national figure, respected by many, feared by others. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, begins watching him closely. Wiretap, surveillance, secret memos. The Bureau calls him a potential threat to national security. The irony is thick. An American pastor, peacefully advocating that the U.S. Constitution and the values it imbues be upheld, is monitored as if he were a foreign enemy agent. By 1959, the NAACP, SCLC, CORE, and local civic organizations have consolidated into an ever stronger network. Leaders travel the South in beat-up cars with Bibles, mimeographs, and bail money tucked beneath the floorboards. In Nashville, students began holding study circles, writing manifestos, and debating strategy. In Birmingham, factory workers pool wages to fund voter registration drives. In Jackson, elderly women knit scarves for jailed protesters. Ministers print flyers on church bulletins. Choirs sing hymns retooled with lyrics of resistance. Children memorize the names of court cases like Bible verses. The spirit of liberation fuses with the gospel. In Montgomery, King publishes his first book, Stride Toward Freedom, and embarks on national speaking tours. At one stop, a black woman named Isola Curry, later diagnosed as mentally ill, stabs in the chest with a letter opener. From his hospital bed, King tells reporters that he bears no ill will, that he is not afraid, and that his work must go on. And then he takes his struggle to an international level. He goes to India to walk in the footsteps of Mahatma Gandhi. He meets with freedom fighters, drinks tea with scholars, and returns to the U.S. filled with renewed purpose. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life, he writes. The spirit of nonviolence is a powerful weapon, more potent than bullets. By the end of 1959, the movement for equal civil rights has matured into a civic institution with structure, political power, and momentum. But full civil rights and equality for people of color in America are still a faraway goal. It will be a journey that takes the nation on a stony path laced with polarization, division, and bloodshed. Close to 10 years after the lynching of Emmett Till, the fight for equal rights at the voting ballot will technically be won when the Voting Rights Act of 1965, commonly known as the Civil Rights Act, is signed into law. But that will neither end inequality and disenfranchisement nor stop racial hatred, violence, and deaths. The victims on the altar of white supremacy will be many. In 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. will be one of them. And through the 1960s to our day, history will take note of names like Malcolm X, Rodney King, Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. In 2025, as the Civil Rights Act celebrates its 60th anniversary, questions are once again being raised about efforts to gerrymander away the votes of black people by redistricting in Texas and other places. Black U.S. households on average earn only 60% of non-Hispanic white households, and inequality plagues not only the African American communities but most other minorities. Driving while black is still cause for arrest, and the list of victims of racially motivated violence has not stopped growing. It is clear that the founding words of the United States of America, that all men are created equal, is not in any way, shape, or form self-evident, and still not a leading ethos in the land of the free and home of the brave. The first step to change that is to never forget.